First off, thank you guys for tuning in to the first part of my live-action Attack on Titan retrospective. It was easily my most ambitious project yet, essentially being 10 years in the making, so if you haven't already, please go check it out. But if you have, keep sharing it around. Either way, I really appreciate it. Just to make things clear, this is not part 2 of the retrospective. I got Cole working on that now.
Please help me.
Basically what this will be is a showcase of all the other bits of trivia pertaining to the making of the live-action Attack on Titan films that I couldn't quite make room for in either the last video or the next. So think of this video as a little bonus, a part 1.5 if you will. The 4 primary sources I'm using for this video are the novelization of the movies by Toji Asakura, the novelization of the miniseries by Shuka Matsuda, the theatrical program for Attack on Titan Part 2, and the final draft of these films, which I do have a copy of on hand. So that said, let's get into it. Spoilers for the live-action Attack on Titan movies ahead. Just as a quick recap of some of the production history from the previous video, in 2011, Toho announced that they were adapting Attack on Titan into a live-action feature, slated for a 2013 release. The film was to be directed by Tetsuya Nakashima, whose version was going to be set in modern Japan, judging by a casting call for civilians to be running away from Titans in a shopping district. Eventually, Nakashima left due to creative differences, and the film was on hold until tokusatsu filmmaker Shinji Higuchi stepped up. Higuchi then worked with film critic and political journalist Tomohiro Machiyama to create a 90-page manuscript that would be pitched to Hajime Isayama himself. The manuscript was set to be a faithful adaptation of the manga's first 3 volumes, and had Levi as the lead character. When the script was pitched to Isayama, he rejected it and insisted that if Attack on Titan were to be made into a live-action film, it needed to make a deliberate effort to be its own unique and creative experience. A version of Attack on Titan that could only be accomplished in film. And so, Isayama was brought on to be part of the creative process. One of the things considered for the films was to have the Titans be entirely computer generated, but the amount of Titans and the juxtaposition with live actors would have made for an uncanny result according to special effects director Katsuro Inoue. So it was decided that the Titans would be depicted through the means of real actors in either costume or makeup with prosthetics, as well as puppets and animatronics. Speaking of the Titans, the Armored Titan was originally going to be much closer to how it appeared in the manga, as shown through concept art by Koji Tajima before being changed to resemble what it would eventually become in the final films. But let's go ahead and get into what these texts have to offer. Starting off with the final draft of the movies, dated April 30th, 2014, which is actually fairly close to what was shown in the final films. Obviously, save for a handful of differences that I'm about to get into. At the start, we actually find that the walls do have names, walls Sotono, Nakano, and Okuno being the outer, middle, and innermost walls, respectively. This introduction also speaks of a large skyscraper named the Tower of Babel, where the military police and government conduct their operations, and oversee the remaining populace of mankind. As we know, these names and the Tower of Babel would never be mentioned in the final films, but the inclusion would have made the world of the live-action Attack on Titan seem larger than it really is. Although, given how much of a role the government has in these films in regards to the main twist, it probably would have been best to keep that mystery as alive as possible. Though this is where the movies start to feel a bit more thematically different from what was shown on screen, and this is something that the novelization even goes into. One of the biggest criticisms toward these movies was how Eren and Mikasa's relationship was handled. While the intent was to show how war and tragedy can tear people apart, and even change them as a means to highlight the importance of camaraderie and companionship. Although this complicated relationship was going to be more thematically layered. Some may recall the scene where Hiana was hitting on Eren, and it turns out that this is the result of the two originally meaning to be romantically involved in some capacity. Allow me to explain. After Eren and Mikasa were separated during the invasion of Monzen, the two struggled to come to terms with the reality of their situations, leading to each of them to believe that they had lost the lives of their significant other. Eren had thought Mikasa died during the attack, and vice versa. Along the way, Eren and Hiana start to form a liking for one another during training. Meanwhile, Mikasa finds herself involved with Shikishima. When the two eventually reunite in Omotamachi, it's bittersweet, as while they're both happy to find each other alive, they see that they have both moved on. It's unknown as to why this dynamic was greatly altered, but we do know that Shinji Higuchi was against the idea of having a love triangle amongst Eren, Mikasa, and Shikishima, believing it took away from the story's main focus, feeling it was unnecessary. necessary, though there is the possibility that this was an idea by Hajime Isayama himself, given his involvement with the making of the story. Another element that was largely omitted was that after the Titan's shifters emerged from their Titan forms, they were going to be naked, as their clothes had completely assimilated with the bodies. When Mikasa slices Eren out of the Attack Titan's nape, the script explicitly describes the wound being in the shape of a vagina, a detail that is actually present once you take another look. It was meant to symbolize Eren's rebirth into a new life, bearing new flesh with new power. This also meant we were going to see Shikishima naked at some point, but also mutilated and steaming as a result of his battle with Eren. No, not that kind of steam. Though the script doesn't say anything about Kubal. Felt like I needed to clarify that. There are plenty of other differences like in dialogue, scene arrangements, and character positions, but nothing entirely noteworthy per se. But one last thing I'd like to go over is that instead of the post-credits scene with the government officials in a mysterious white room watching over Eren and Mikasa, Part 2 was meant to end off zooming in on a bird with a camera attached to it. Definitely a more unnerving way to close off such a huge epic after a high note. But I think the post-credits scene was the way to go, as it didn't take too much away from the crescendo of the finale, and still comes off as effective and intriguing without interfering with the emotion of Part 2's ending. Although there is a preparatory draft of the movies dated March 20th, 2014, just over a month before the final. Going off of now closed auction listings, those belong to me, goddammit. This one also doesn't differ too much from the final films, except for a moment where Sannagi, instead of being gunned down, was originally meant to be bitten in half after trying to attack Shikishima in his Titan form, in the same fashion as what Annie does to Eld, in that he was trying to come in for a killing blow while Shikishima was blinded. But now, let's go ahead and dive into all of the other wild changes and additions that are present in Toji Asakura's novelization, which are usually based on early film drafts. A decent amount of what occurs in the novelization does wound up happening in the final films, though some of these range from adding further context to character actions and motivations to things that straight up did not make it into the final films. Some may recall how Mikasa had simply froze during the Monzon invasion, seemingly unable to stand up and run from the Titans while separated from Eren and holding a baby. We do see her get trampled prior to her miraculous disappearance, but the novelization adds that her ankle was actually twisted here. Guess it's an Ackerman thing. During the 2-year time skip, we are treated to scenes of Eren and Armin doing manual labor as prep for their military training and in between. This is also where we see the spark of Eren and Hiana's eventual reciprocation, as well as how Mikasa has become Eren's primary motivation and how he refuses to never let the same mistake happen to anyone else, feeling immense guilt for her supposed loss. There are points where Eren even hallucinates seeing Mikasa, likely as an effect of PTSD from the Titan invasion of Monzon. On the flip side, Mikasa experiences similar effects, given how she too believes that Eren was lost in the attack, though not exactly to the same psychological extent as we see. Much like how Hiana had more to her character, the same can be said for Lil. In Part 1, she and Fukushi were a couple written to be more similar to Franz and Hannah from the source material, in that they were lovey-dovey and eventually died. Kinda like with how the story handled Eren and Mikasa, they were a parallel in how war can tear apart these relationships. Though while Eren and Mikasa were more psychological, focused on their denial and dehumanization respectively, theirs was more immediate and physical. But in the novelization, while Fukushi is more or less the same, Lil was more headstrong and even got into a fight with Eren, who refused to fight back after he had insulted Fukushi for being so vulnerable. Her tough and defensive demeanor is certainly more present in the miniseries that's set during the time skip in Part 1. There's also this publicity still where she is clearly standing next to Sasha, as we can see her arrows peeking out from the side. I can only assume this is from the same photo shoot, as there's also this still of Mikasa and Sasha standing together. and both images had the same truck behind them. And this is meant to replicate a scene from part 2. Obviously, stills don't always equate to removed scenes and can purely just be for publicity, though it does make one wonder if this was to hide the fact that Lil dies in part 1, or if she was considered to be kept alive through part 2, though it's likely the former, as both the final script and novel still kill her off, as do the storyboards. Keep in mind, the movies were shot from May to August of 2014. The script wasn't finalized until April. On the topic of character changes, Yunohira was completely different in personality. Whereas he's more serious and stern in the films and miniseries, even novelization for the miniseries, he's quite the opposite here, as he comes off as way too careless and lacking in composure. In fact, it was him who woke up the Titans on the way to Omotomachi, and not Hiana. Perhaps it was to make a statement on the unreliable authority, especially when you consider the numerous parallels to Imperial Japan that are drawn in the story. While novelization Yunohira would have leaned into the inherently over-the-top and silly theatrics of Attack on Titan, a part of me prefers what we ended up getting, as his place does add to the bleak uncertainty and urgency of the story and setting. There's also that hint of familiarity with Keith's Shadis. Speaking of the scene where the Titans wake up on the way to Omotomachi, instead of stopping for recon only to find cows, the scout regiment finds a formation of severed heads in a straight line. Nobody knows what this could possibly mean, or who or what could have done this, but it's implied that it's the heads of soldiers from the previous expedition, and that the gesture is a warning that death is coming. The row of heads is also what causes Yunohira to scream and wake up the Titans. Way to go, dude. The novel also features a handful of original characters who aren't present in the movies, one of which is Kanaya. All we know is that he acts as one of Shikishima's underlings, even having a handful of conversations with him and Kubal, though his exclusion may have to do with his character not exactly amounting to much in the story at large. There's also a handful of other characters like a scout named Yakumo, Chief Hotogi who replaces Yunohira, a garrison officer named Kunugi, and rebels named Ichibuse and Kunawa, though they're not given much to do. Shikishima also has some different interactions with Eren, mainly one where he addresses Mikasa being at his side. He explains that not only did he teach her to survive, but that they help one another in the midst of these hard times. Their relationship isn't a romantic one, as Shikishima admits to not having such feelings for her, despite it being very one-sided in the films. It's also this scene where he straight up says he's seen Mikasa naked, which rightfully angers Eren. The deaths in the novel are also rather gruesome. In the case of Hiana, instead of getting swallowed whole, the book goes into explicit detail on how she is chomped to bits. Fukushi and Lil are axed off the same way as in the movies. Soda is actually shot multiple times by military police officers while trying to defend Eren, instead of Kubal forcing a soldier to fire at him. Oh, and remember Kanaya? His neck gets snapped by the armor titan. As for Sannagi, instead of being gunned down, he sacrifices himself by triggering the explosives with a cigarette while holding the doll his siblings gave him. Jean and Kubal still die the same way, however. Chapter 6, Giga, oh yeah, all the chapters are titled after Dante's Inferno, by the way, opens with a flashback where a young Mikasa runs away from home and into a forest. It's freezing, and she tiredly lies against a tree, refusing to come back, lacking the strength to do so, only to be found by Eren, who wraps his scarf around her to keep her warm and escorts her back. They would grow closer and closer and became like family, especially with Eren insisting that she keeps his scarf, telling her that he doesn't want to see her cold ever again. You know, this is actually cute. I wish they left this in subsequent drafts, as it would have further highlighted Eren and Mikasa's devotion towards one another, and with little trace of her humanity present, she regains it by remembering the one who treated her like a person, not a soldier. I felt the scarf in the movies always carried that significance regardless, but I think this would have been a more impactful addition. The following chapter, Caesarea, is a bridge between the two parts of the story. Eren is recalling a memory he has of his father Grisha taking him to Soda and leaving him there with some strange documents and materials. Grisha explains to Soda that Carla has been taken and that he left his oldest with someone he can trust. and suggests that he raises Eren. He also tells him that when Eren is older, explain to him that he died, and to inform him about his power and fate for the future of mankind. Now, this is very different from what we do see in the films, where the military police break into the Jaeger's basement and Carly gives Eren to Soda before his parents are killed. This does leave a pretty big loose end in the overall narrative. Is Grisha still alive? What do you guys think? The scene where the Armor Titan, or the White Titan as it's called here, first appears is also a little different, as Shikishima miraculously appears after the Titan had fled to try and organize a plan before they separate, inevitably turning out to be a ruse. As for Eren's Titan form, it's called the Mysterious Titan. And now we get to the moment that drops a major info bomb on the reader, and that is the basement. In fact, the basement is described to be just like Grisha's rather than the white room we see in the films. It's here where we also learn Shikishima's backstory, as it turns out his upbringing is nearly identical to Zeke's in the manga. As when he was growing up, Grisha had led a revolutionary group called the Gulls, which he, Soda, and apparently Hiana were a part of. But seeing another, more destructive way to free their people from the oppressive ruling class, Shikishima reports his father. And while this is going on, Shikishima is referring to himself in third person, but using the name Haku, which turns out to be his real name as he reveals later in the climax. Also confirming that Eren and Shikishima are brothers. From this, Shikishima begins his own rebellion named the Falcons, acting as a more extremist group that pushes the agenda of the Gulls to a greater extent. This also explains why the Wings of Freedom, the emblem of the Scout Regiment, is like that. What the government has done was to use it as a mark for death without explicitly saying it. Anyone who is placed in the Scout Regiment is to simply be fodder for the Titans, for the sake of control over the remaining human populace. There's also the fact that the time since the Great Titan War wasn't actually 100 years, it was 200 years. There's also stuff like the Shifters being called Jaeger Titans, normal Titans are called Wraith Titans, but check out my video on the Titans' origin for more on that. Another thing I've kind of omitted up to this point were the Wall Cultists, but it's okay because the book and the movies don't really touch on them. Sasha and Armin actually join in on the final battle against the Colossal Titan. Mikasa actually gets injured during it, and there's no post-credits scene. In fact, there's nothing that ever really alludes to that here. At the end, our characters look off to the ocean, a seagull flies about, and that's it. That's it for the movie novelization. Now it's time for the miniseries. Kinda like the films, the miniseries remained mostly intact, but to a greater extent. The first episode hardly has any differences, but episodes 2 and 3 have some progressively major ones. We find out that Sasha's parents are actually dead at the time of the films, and that she is living with extended family, with her aunt and uncle as her guardians. There's also a scene where she skips out on training to go eat and is punished similarly to how she is in the source material. As for episode 3, we actually see more of Hiana, as she's actually a pretty prominent character here. She shares several scenes with Lil, as they both endured similar trauma with the Titans. In Hiana's case, the father of her child was killed during the Monzen attack, which Tomohiro Machiyama cited Masaki Kobayashi's The Human Condition as an influence for her character. There's even a scene where she's watching the soon-to-be scouts from afar, Eren especially. And there's an additional scene where we see the scouts embark on a mission, now bearing the Wings of Freedom. This is likely for the same expedition that failed. Now, there is something I want to address. Many have wondered how or why is Kubal the Colossal Titan? While it can be assessed that he actually took the Jaeger serum for himself after killing Eren's parents, we don't get to see it. That is, until this promotional still that is only present in the theatrical program for Attack on Titan Part 2, where he is very clearly holding a syringe in the same uniform he wears during that scene. Speaking of, this program also contains several of Shinji Higuchi's notes and visions of the setting and world building that would ultimately be scrapped. Here we see that Monzen and other Wall Sotono districts were originally going to resemble something akin to Kowloon Walled City in Hong Kong, which would have made the film's imperialism parallels more noticeable, as Japan did occupy Hong Kong during World War II. The shapes of the walls were meant to resemble a sarcophagus to evoke their harrowing nature, while Nakano was originally going to have electrical towers and power lines strung across, with Higuchi citing the original Godzilla as influence. And Omotomachi was going to be a fortress rather than a city. And lastly, the gates between the walls had more of an amphitheater look to them. Oh, and remember when Levi was considered to be the main character? Higuchi's notes do provide some insight as to how his and Tomohiro Machiyama's manuscript would have played out. Basically, not only was it an adaptation of the first 3 volumes, but it was going to feature 2 converging narratives, one centered on Eren and another focused on Levi. Kind of like how it played out in the manga, but the structure and outline suggested that Levi was going to have a bigger focus. The program also features a piece by Tomohiro Machiyama where he provides some insight on the making of these films. I already went over this process in my video, but did you know that Isayama wanted Jean to be the main character at some point? This was likely due to how Isayama found himself resonating with Jean as a character rather than Eren. Mikasa was originally meant to be far scarier, with Machiyama citing that there was going to be a scene where she kills several soldiers, which I can only imagine was going to be during Eren's trial. But editor Shintaro Kawakubo suggested that her character and actions would be toned down, as it was a bit extreme. I suppose this would influence that one iconic scene from season 4 of the anime. Other scrapped moments involve a chase scene where the Scout Regiment go after the Armor Titan through a series of highways and ruins to save Eren, with Machiyama citing the Death Star run from the original Star Wars as influence, and that the attack and Armor Titans were meant to battle each other on the wall for the bomb rather than on the ground, which was where Titans would have swarmed about. Higuchi's notes also have Sonny and Bean play a significant role in the plot, as they're the reason for the knowledge that exists about the Titans outside of what the government really knows. But their presence is only regulated to the miniseries. And finally, even though Levi was scrapped, he actually made it pretty far into earlier concepts of the story, according to Machiyama. Though, as we know, he was eventually assimilated into Shikishima, along with other characters like Reiner, Erwin, and Annie, though Kubal and Lil do borrow from Erwin and Annie respectively in some capacity. And as we now know, Shikishima would become the basis for Zeke in the manga. What do you guys make of all this? Comment below, and thank you guys for watching. Want to shout out my channel members and my supporters on Patreon, so if you like what you see, want to get early access to videos and exclusive content, click the link below. Also want to give a special thanks to Kaiju X for helping out with this video's research. Other than that, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see y'all next time for part 2 of my live action Attack on Titan retrospective. Take it easy, everyone.